Good morning, and I'm so glad all of you are here today. For those that don't know me, my name is Lena VanAusdle. I have my master's degree in clinical counseling. I'm not currently licensed anywhere, but I do volunteer with Light of Hope, which is our helpline that United Church of God has started for mental health resources. I live in New York City with my husband. He's a pastor. I work for the church doing proofreading and organizing for Good Works. So that's just a little bit about me. I honestly woke up this morning working on my presentation, and I was not sure if I was hoping no one would show up or if lots of people would show up. I didn't know which would be worse, but I'm really glad that you all are here. So today I'm talking about addiction. And I know addiction can sound like such a big and scary word, addiction. And because it sounds big and scary, it can be easy to dismiss it as something that doesn't pertain to you. And it's easy to think, well, that's not me because, and you can fill in your own blanks. But whether we know it or not, or whether we want to admit it or not, many, if not all of us, have been affected by addiction. Whether it's something that you have struggled with in the past, or maybe it's something you're currently struggling with, or someone that is close to you has struggled with. And I'm going to be a little bit nerdy for a while in the beginning of this presentation, and I'm going to talk about some statistics. I love statistics. I find them fascinating, so I hope you find this information helpful. Statistically speaking, we have all been affected one way or another by addiction. According to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, nearly half of all people aged 12 or older in the US has used an illicit substance at least once. And of those 50% of the population, an estimated 25% suffer from drug dependency or addiction. Of the nearly 50% of Americans who consume alcohol, 20% suffer from alcohol addiction. In any given year, approximately 69% of American men and 40% of American women view pornography. And according to some research, 13% of Americans show signs of food addiction, and at least 38% of adults report overeating or eating unhealthy foods because of stress. I know addictions is not a pretty subject to talk about, but it is an important topic, and it's something we should be talking about. And I want to be very clear, I'm not in any way asking you to diagnose yourself or anyone else based on, what I present here today. I'm just providing information. Information so that you can be more aware of what addiction is and what it can look like and why it's important to understand and to take steps to either help yourself or help others that might be struggling. So I'm going to start out by defining addiction. Addiction is a chronic, relapsing brain disorder characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli, despite harmful consequences. And on a physiological basis, addiction actually alters our brain structure and function, particularly in areas related to reward and decision-making, or our dopamine systems, which if you were in the first seminar, I know she talked about some of this with our electronics addictions. But clinically speaking, there are actually 10 criteria that a clinician will look at to help determine if someone has a substance abuse disorder or an addiction. And I'm just going to put these up here. They are tolerance, withdrawal, hazardous use, and that means, so tolerance, I'm going to explain some of them as we go. Tolerance is when you start using a certain amount, but to get the same effect, you have to use more. And you keep having to use more. Withdrawal is you feel badly when you don't have it. And sometimes this is a physical feeling. It depends on what the substance is. It depends on what the, and not just substance, even electronics. If you ever see a kid who can't have their iPad, that they've had it all week and they melt down, that's a withdrawal symptom from not having something that they get dopamine from that. Hazardous use, that might be drinking and driving, or using marijuana and driving. That's a hazardous use, or using excessive amounts of alcohol. Social or interpersonal problems related to your use. If your family or friends are telling you that they have a problem, or you're belligerent, or you're isolating or anything like that, that is a sign. Neglecting major roles to use. So if you're not taking care of your home or yourself or your job, or you're using larger amounts for longer periods of time. Repeated attempts to quit or control use have failed. A lot of time is spent using or thinking about using. Or you have physical or psychological problems related to use. Or you start giving up things that you love in order to use. So you quit playing the guitar, or you quit hiking, or you quit calling your friends and family. Now, you don't have to have all of these to be considered to have an addiction. You do have to meet 2 or more of these criteria. Now, currently the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or a book that clinicians will use to diagnose mental health disorders, does not recognize addictions to pornography or food. These are considered behavioral addictions. But that does not mean that they aren't real and serious problems, because they really can be. And science takes a while to catch up to what is actually happening in our lived experiences. So far, there's actually only one behavioral addiction that's recognized by the DSM, and that is gambling. And that wasn't even recognized until the 1980s. So there is ongoing study into pornography addiction and food addiction and technological addiction. So these are things that are being studied. Science hasn't caught up with us yet. So the studies that have come out so far show that the effects on the brain of pornography and food overconsumption are similar to that of drugs and alcohol. It has a similar effect on our brains. And because of these similarities, we can use the same criteria to identify substance use disorders as behavioral disorders, such as pornography or food addictions. So pornography addiction, in addition to these, would be the excessive use of pornography that disrupts daily life and your emotional well-being. Substance addiction is the compulsive use of substances like alcohol, drugs, or tobacco, despite negative consequences. And food addiction is the compulsive consumption of food, often triggered by emotional states that lead to negative physical and psychological outcomes. Now that we have a basic definition of what addiction is, I'd like to discuss some of the dangers of addiction. And again, we're talking in this particular seminar about pornography, substance abuse, and food addictions. So all addictions, whether pornography, substance, or food, will hijack your brain's reward system, particularly your dopamine pathways. And it will reinforce, the compulsive behavior. So neuroplasticity, also known as brain plasticity, is the ability of your brain to change and adapt its structure, function, and connections in response to stimuli. So this process can happen at a lot of different levels, so molecular or behavioral, and it can be affected by a lot of different things. But it can be positive or negative. It can be adaptive or maladaptive, not the neuroplasticity, not addiction. So we can learn things because we have neuroplasticity. We can learn new ideas and how to do things, but because we have this neuroplasticity, it can, when we have negative reinforcements, like any kind of like overeating or doing drugs or drinking too much or watching pornography, it can also cause us to have a maladaptive process. So we're feeling anxious and sad, and maybe we watch pornography because it gives us that hit of dopamine and it makes us feel good in that moment. But then when it's over, you feel sad and angry and self-loathing and all of these other things. And so you then watch more pornography to feel better, even though you're just making yourself feel worse. And so you end up watching more and more, and you're training your brain that this is what will make me feel better, even though in reality it's not making you feel better, except in that very moment. So some studies have shown that when presented with images of sexualized people, the brain actually perceives the person as an object rather than a human being. So this is called objectification, and repeated exposure can lead to an intensification of objectification, because women specifically in pornography are presented as objects for sexual pleasure. So what they found is during the study, they invited men in and they would show them different images. They would show them an image of a hammer, and a certain part of their brain would light up, and that's like, okay, that's a tool, this is what I use. And then they would show images of animals, and another part of their brain would light up, and they would show images of, say, an older gentleman fully clothed, and they would have a different part of the brain would light up. When they would show sexualized images of women, the same portion of the brain that lit up when they saw the picture of a hammer, it would light up in the same place. Because of this objectification, they've literally turned this person into an object rather than a person who has thoughts, feelings, and autonomy. So that's one big problem with pornography. It can also lead to relational damage by decreasing emotional intimacy and trust in relationships. And I talked about the self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Substance abuse, chronic substance use can lead to liver damage, lung damage, heart problems, brain damage. It increases the incidence of depression, anxiety, and cognitive impairment by altering our neurotransmitter systems. So it's pretty common to know that methamphetamine and cocaine are commonly cited as causing psychosis. It increases your risk of developing psychosis and schizophrenia. But it's not as commonly known, and I think it's important, and I get really kind of like jazzed up about this one. So marijuana is becoming legalized in a lot of states, and this is why I get like kind of riled up about it, because studies have shown that marijuana use, especially as a teenager, and this doesn't mean that if you use marijuana once as a teenager, automatically this is going to happen. I'm talking about a risk factor. So several studies have shown, coming out of Sweden actually, that marijuana use, especially as a teenager, can increase your risk of psychosis and developing schizophrenia later in life. And the more you use, the higher your risk becomes. And one study found that 13% of cases of schizophrenia could be averted if all cannabis use were prevented. And so no one thinks that I'm just picking on marijuana. There's another article published by the National Library of Medicine. Smoking tobacco is actually a prospective risk factor for impaired cognitive function later in life. Having smoking predicts incident cognitive impairment and decline. So middle-aged smokers have lower psychomotor speed and cognitive flexibility compared to never smokers. Basically, nicotine, whether in cigarettes or vape pens, makes you dumber. They have found that, and this starts while you're using it in a younger age, and it continues to get worse as you age. So your ability it affects your brain's ability to make neural pathways. And then food addiction. Food addiction can lead to obesity, metabolic issues, including an increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and insulin resistance. It can also lead to feelings of guilt, anxiety, depression, and social isolation. When you're eating and you feel badly about eating, you don't want to eat in front of people, you may hide that. And food is a tough one because we need food to survive. You can't just cut out food. You have to eat. And so when we're dealing with a food addiction, you have to be very careful in how you view it. Food is not our enemy. Food is neither good nor bad. You need food, but you need to eat it in the proper manner and way. And it can be used as a coping mechanism for people. So now that you're probably bored to death with all of my statistics, I'm actually going to talk about some practical steps for supporting yourself or others that are facing addictions. When supporting someone that is struggling with addiction, first and foremost, we need to approach people with compassion and with empathy. Addiction is a disease. It is not a moral failing. And I know this can be a tricky delineation when we relate it to our faith, because we're supposed to be developing character traits such as self-control. But addiction goes beyond self-control. And as we've already discussed, addiction literally affects your ability to process and think properly. So you want to offer support and avoid judgment. This doesn't mean that we excuse addictive behavior or enable someone's addiction. We can't do that. But we need to listen without condemnation, create space for individuals to express their struggles without fear of being judged or condemned. If someone, especially our teens, comes to us and we condemn them, harangue them, or gossip about them, we introduce shame into the equation. And this will do nothing to help them overcome their current problem and will likely discourage them from seeking help in the future, especially from you. And for our teens, they will likely seek answers and help from their friends or the internet, which often reinforces the problem rather than alleviating it. And I know we have some parents here. If you're not talking to your kids about pornography or drugs, they're talking to somebody. And you want them to talk to you because you have answers for them that the world doesn't have. Second, you want to encourage professional help. Suggest therapy, counseling, support groups. There are 12-step groups, programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. There are also Christian-based recovery programs like Celebrate Recovery that offer a faith-based approach to overcoming addiction. Third, and honestly, I think this is most important, pray with and for them and fast with them and for them. Encourage them to pray and fast and Bible study as a source of strength in overcoming addiction. We know that God is the source of our strength and healing, and we have to keep him a part of the process. Fourth, be there with them. Don't hand them a 12-step brochure and walk away or say, I'm praying for you, and walk out. Be someone that they can call or text when they are struggling with temptation. Check in with them periodically and really listen to what they're saying, and sometimes what they're not saying. Ask the questions, even if it feels really awkward and really intrusive. You're not doing this to be nosy, but to truly understand them and to give them the opportunity to solidify and verbalize the struggles they're having. Sometimes people don't know how to say what they're feeling. Sometimes they need somebody to ask them the questions so that they can verbally get through what they're going through. Some examples of what you can ask: how are you really doing? Because sometimes, we say, oh, how are you doing? It's a greeting almost. But when we're talking to somebody who is struggling with something, ask them this: how are you really doing? And this one's gonna be tough. Have you been tempted lately? Are you avoiding triggers? And now triggers are situations, places, or people that are associated with addiction. And I can talk a little bit more about what triggers are, but ask them that. Are they avoiding their triggers? And help them to identify what their triggers might be, because they might not even recognize that being lonely is a trigger, or being around a certain person is a trigger. They might not even recognize what those are. So ask them those questions. Help them to dig into that. Fifth and finally, don't let your relationship only be about their addiction. It's important to have those conversations, but do and talk about things that are unrelated. Go see movies, read a book together, play sports, go fishing, go for a hike, paint, do a puzzle. It doesn't really matter what it is, but spend time with them as a person in a setting and an activity that has nothing to do with their problem, because they are more than their problem. And you want to do who they are as a person and things that they might enjoy. Now, if you are struggling with addiction, many of the personal steps that you will take mirror the advice for walking with someone through a recovery. First, you have to acknowledge that you have a problem. The first step in overcoming any addiction is admitting that there is a problem, whether it's pornography, substances, or food. If you can't see that there's a problem, there's no way you can move past it because you'll always have an excuse for your behavior. Second, implement spiritual practices. And again, this is the most important part. Prayer and meditation. Engage in regular prayer to ask for God's strength and guidance. Fasting is such a powerful spiritual tool. And accountability. Find someone you trust, a mentor, a pastor, a counselor, a friend that will hold you accountable. And be open and honest with them about your struggles. We have to be able to be vulnerable with each other. And this is where the not being judgmental comes in. If we shut them down because we've made them feel bad, they can't be vulnerable, and their recovery is going to be that much harder. And when we're being open and honest about our struggles, we also have to allow our accountability partners to ask the tough questions without becoming defensive or offended, because that's kind of easy to do. But if we want to get better and we want someone to help us, we have to be willing to let them ask the tough questions. And recognize that they want to help you, not hurt you. They're on your team. Third, you want to limit your triggers. Maybe that's removing access to pornography, substances, or it is removing access to pornography, substances, or unhealthy food. And that might mean putting limits on how you access the internet, or in some cases, removing access to the internet completely. You get a flip phone and not a smartphone. If you have problems with food addiction, do a grocery pickup so you're not tempted by foods that you know will cause you to overeat and when you're walking through the grocery store. Avoid friends that you would use drugs or alcohol with if that's what you need to do. Fourth, implement healthy substitutes. Replace addictive behaviors with positive activities, exercising, hiking, swimming, working out, reading, painting, coloring, putting together puzzles, knitting, writing, whatever it is that you enjoy, fill your time with it. Because if you don't fill your time with something, if you don't put good in place of the bad will come back. Fifth, be mindful. This means consciously considering how you are feeling and why you may be feeling the way that you do. For food addiction, practice mindful eating to recognize true hunger cues and avoid emotional eating. So, am I bored or am I hungry? Am I sad or am I actually, I'm going to kind of side part here. Substance abuse a lot of times starts with a legitimate need. There are people who are taking pain medication because they've had surgery, and they get to a point where they're taking it because it makes them feel good and not taking away their pain. So be honest with yourself. Am I in pain, or am I just taking this because I want to feel good? Sixth, and finally, seek therapeutic help. Find a counselor. If you're dealing with a severe substance abuse problem, you may want to seek an addiction treatment program. Find group therapies options in your area or a recovery group that can provide mutual support. I hope you guys have found this helpful. I'm going to have a few minutes for questions if you guys have any. Otherwise, that is all the information I have for you.